Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to this fun little interview with Kate Burda, who has also been a professor in our program here at Purdue. Kate, I want to go ahead and ask you a couple questions to help our students understand the topic. You are clearly an expert in this field, and we are so happy to have you today. What has been your career path and the journey to get to where you are today?
I started out at the front desk during college and during the summer, and I always just found it so fascinating. Kind of the not only what I like to call the business of hotels, or being in the business of hotels, but also being on the business of hotels. So kind of that business model, how things work, that whole curiosity of the larger scope of how does this asset hum?
Huh? And so when you say that you started at the front desk, were you just checking people in, checking people out, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and even being a PBX operator at one point, where where you're, as I say that out loud, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it feels like the 1950s where you're patching calls through. But it was just being at the operating the phones. And so, yeah, from there, I've always had I've always had this great attraction to hotels, and I've been in the business for about 28 years. And as a consulting firm, it's kind of interesting because 60% of our revenues on any given year is from hospitality, and the other part comes from medical devices and pharma. And I don't know, there's something about hotels that just has a life force, and then I really should say overall tourism, that just has a life force of its own, and it just keeps pulling me back in.
It does that. It does that. Me too. I've just continually, stopped and started and gotten into different sides of the industry as well. So when you said PBX a few minutes ago, so yes, back in the day we were changing phone lines when guests would call in for the rooms and things. Nowadays they still call it PBX, and it is when a lot of the guests will call down for extra towels, any of the services they might need, right? So that is today's PBX. So they still use that terminology. It just does have a slightly different meaning in today, right?
Thank goodness I'm still relevant.
You're totally relevant. Yes. You started to bring up your company a little bit. So you have a consultancy. Can you tell us a little bit about what your company does for hotels?
Absolutely. So we focus on revenue performance, overall revenue strategy. And we do that through what I call the revenue trifecta of sales, marketing, and revenue management. And so, and it's interesting because we're talking about distribution systems, which partners, which is revenue management is an offshoot of that. But it's interesting when I talk about revenue strategy, people immediately say, "Oh, so you do revenue management?" It's really the third, kind of the third leg of that stool. And what's interesting today is, revenue management has gotten a lot of press in the last 5-10 years, and really has risen to really incredible levels, and should, of its own merit. But it's interesting today because at its purest form, revenue management manages established demand. And so I like to think about revenue management and the distribution systems even more so as really stop and go lights on this freeway of traffic that's going through our booking systems, be that, through direct channels, indirect channels, third party, et cetera. So what's interesting in today's world is, in times of COVID, there is no demand. And so revenue management has really had to kind of re-engineer their thinking. And we've really had to think about, how do we elevate the level of play within sales and marketing, which are your two workhorses that create demand. So it's an interesting time. It's a very interesting time because if there is no demand, revenue management, what we're trying to steer away from is a price-driven sale, where it's kind of this race to the bottom, and which is it's kind of a scary time.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that you say that. So in summary, if I'm understanding correctly, in the past, revenue management, we were working with the sales demand that we already had to maximize it. But right now, because of COVID and things being a little bit rough, there isn't that demand. So what we're doing is going out and making that demand, right? Through sales and marketing and through the channels that we use in distribution, right? Is that
That's
what you're
right.
saying?
That's spot on. You've got
Okay.
it. Yeah,
Okay.
you've got it. And you know, in times past, you know, when we were looking at RevPAR growth of 7%, that's pretty wholesome. And so we could really optimize a hotel in the distribution systems through revenue management. When there isn't demand, now those sales and marketing teams really have to understand how do they create demand so revenue management can manage those stop and go lights in its most simplest form.
I love the stop and go light analogy because that's a perfect way to kind of describe what's happening. So you have this, there's so much economics in what we're talking about, which is
Oh,
interesting too. And so we have, right now what's going on with the economy, obviously COVID's happening and everything. So we have the same amount of rooms we've always had. They're not always filling. We need to fill them, but we don't want to make the price too low. And for those who might not remember that part of the hotel class, there's a lot of expense in turning a room. So there are some times where we may not want to fill it if the rate is too low because it could cost us money, right? Is
yeah.
that possible? Isn't that a complex thing to think about? But it's true, right?
You know, my heart just kind of like did a little pitter patter because, you know, I'm a closet geek. I love economics, and probably that's why I love revenue management so much. But you're so spot on, because we have to look at supply and demand all the time, and what revenue management can do, and what the distribution systems can do, is they can shift share. I can pull from my competitors. I can do this. Usually at that point that revenue management is getting involved with it at the pricing point, at that price point, it becomes a price driven sale. And so kind of going back, that economics is how do we create that demand before it becomes at the point of sale? And what we talk about with our clients is that point of inspiration. How do we engage with that customer early so we can own mind share, then rather than just at a price driven point of sale where it becomes a price driven sale and we're shifting share from one to the other? Because you're spot on. There's only, if we're only looking at the demand or what we call constrained demand, there's only a certain amount, and we can only move it around.
And that's why so many hotels try to focus that on as much direct booking as possible, right? Because they're going to be able to have that personalized connection, have a chance to capture some of those details from the guests right at the point of booking, and especially if they're involved in loyalty programs and things, so that they can then elevate the customer experience, which in some cases right now in our digital world is the only differentiation factor that hotels have over these online booking engines, who are sometimes undercutting even the negotiated rate in their contract, where they should have been booking like a hotel, a car, and a flight. And then all of a sudden they see that hotel rate that shouldn't have been sold that low, sold individually without the rest of the package. So it undercuts the hotel's rate that they have, right? So I know I'm kind of all over the place, but
Yeah.
we need the hotels to capture as much as we can at the direct booking. But we know hotels can't do it alone, right? So that's where the distribution of this stuff comes in. So on that point, can you explain to us and break it down simply, because you're such an expert in this, but can you explain to us what is distribution management from your perspective as such a professional?
Yeah. So distribution in its purest form is just all of the vehicles that get the traveler to our hotel. So that could be indirect through brand online travel agencies or OTAs. It can be through third party, it can be through meeting planners, or it can be direct, which is brand.com, or just calling the hotel or our sales team and having that relationship with those organizations. So if we think about it from that customer standpoint of what are all the different ways, and ways being channels, what are all the different ways that we can book a hotel? And each of those ways or those channels, whether it's hotels.com or Expedia or the CVB, all of them, what you were just saying, have a cost associated with them. And so we look at not only all of our customers out there, and really trying to understand that customer so we can be able to own the customer experience. So we may be able to have a relationship where we're able to drive them to a cheaper channel for us. So there's two things in that. I just want to unpack it a wee bit. Is the cost of acquisition is skyrocketing. And if my costs are, going to accounting, if my costs are going up, then my profitability is going down. So post 9/11 and post financial crisis, we saw the cost per channel, whether that's transaction fees, whether that is cost per reservation, however those agreements with those third parties or those distribution channel companies worked, we saw them skyrocket.
Meaning that the hotels are paying more either per room or per block of rooms to the online travel agencies, or Expedia, or even a global distribution system too.
Yep, a global distribution system too, as well as the brands themselves. Because hotels, if I chose, let's say I'm a hotel owner, I chose to be with, let's just say Marriott, because it's a strong brand, and I choose Marriott for its operational prowess, but also I want to be part of Marriott Rewards. I want to have the access to their national sales team and so forth. I pay for those reservations. Not only do I pay for the per reservation, if a national salesperson sends me a lead and it's direct, I'm paying for the brand, the brand fees, as well as that transaction cost of those reservations. So post 9/11, we saw it happen. We saw that skyrocket. Post financial crisis, we saw it again. And so what we're starting to see is that same thing happening. Now, there was a moment where post COVID, people were doing a lot of direct booking. And we were really excited about that because, and the thinking behind that was they felt more secure, comfortable, cared for going directly to the source, given kind of what was going on in the world. Now that what we're seeing is that deteriorating, and the OTAs becoming more strengthened. And so we were hoping that our revenue teams could hold on to that and gain a foothold, but we're starting to see that erode.
Okay. And when we say online travel agencies or OTAs, can you give us just a very basic understanding of what that is? Excuse me.
Absolutely. So there's two kind of buckets of online travel agencies. One is what I call opaque, and one is called merchant. And many different brands call them different things. So let me explain to you. That's actually Hyatt and Hilton terminology. Marriott uses different vernacular. But net, the opaque traveler, and I want you to think about it like an opaque window, or they can't see who they're buying. So it's a total price-driven sale. An example of that is Priceline.
I was going to say, I think I booked with them once going to Vegas, and I could only see that I was getting a 4-star hotel and not which one it was. Is that what you mean? Yep,
that's exactly where you're buying the location. Like you said, I'm going to Vegas, and you're buying probably the star level. So there's a comfort of service.
Yeah.
and the price level. So there's no loyalty whatsoever to the brand. None. It's all, the loyalty is the location, the price, and the distribution channel, or the OTA. In this case, it's Priceline. That's opaque. The next category is merchant, and merchant models are like a hotels.com or an Expedia or a booking.com, where I can see who I'm booking. I can see that I'm booking the Hampton Inn or the JW Marriott, and so why that is important is the customer starts to have a little bit more loyalty to the brand, but they're having more loyalty to the actual OTA, because like you see, hotels.com, you can earn loyalty points just like you could within Marriott, and so forth.
And that's fairly new, right? That the OTAs are starting to get loyalty programs involved in this, which is just going to also create more competition and issues for the hoteliers, right?
Exactly. Yes, because they understand how powerful they are. Right. And
right.
And within the group side, we have the same thing. It's just there's meeting planner points, same idea, just a different thinking. Then the next.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Are you saying that there's a meeting planner version of this? Can you talk about that for just a second?
You bet.
I think we might get into that later in the course. Wink, wink.
Yeah. So just like it's a loyalty program where you can get if you're a meeting planner, you can get many different offerings or points or status. If I trend with Marriott, I get booking meeting planner points. Same thing with Cvent, which is a opaque channel, OTA channel, but for the group business, right?
Oh, this is awesome. I love that we're getting into this stuff.
Yeah. So again, this whole incentive system, is really becoming powerful. And I remember I was working with a private equity group that was investing in a third party intermediary for the group side. And this was a number of years ago, and hotels were like, oh no, but we own group, right? Group will always come to us because we own the customer, and that's just a high touch customer. Well, guess what? We have all of these different companies, Helms Briscoe, Cvent, on and on and on, that is taking a lot of that workload and making it a very transactional sell.
It's funny. I've worked with that one group that you just mentioned. I don't think I'm allowed to say which property I was at when I did, but so I know the power behind that Helms Briscoe brand that you were talking about. So that's interesting. And so let me understand this. So then if now this is also in the meeting planner world too, then hotels are now having to pay for those opaque channels for meetings too, aren't they? Like, how do they get in with Cvent? How do they get in with, what was the other one that you said?
Helms Briscoe. There was another one. There's a number of different ones where I urge your, and probably when you get to it in your course, take a look at cvent.com, and it's the same. It's the same idea, just on a larger meeting planning scale. Now I'm going to add a little bit more salt to the wound. If you're the investor, or the owner or the management company. So we've got all of these.
Of the hotel. I'm sorry. Of the hotel.
Thank you. Of the hotel. So we have all of these acquisition costs. Now I'm going to give you the worst case scenario, and it happens all the time. The CVBs and the the destination management teams, a visit
Fort Wayne, visit Orlando.
Visit whatever. They're seeking leads too. So there's been times where hotels have had the cost of, let's say, a meeting planner. Then they've had the national sales say, well, we have this relationship, and they tag it, and then there's a cost to it. And then the CVB says, yeah, but we help bring it here into our city. And so many times a hotel will find itself paying for that business 3 or 4 times over.
Holy moly. Wow, that's crazy. Because I come from the Tampa St. Pete market, which has a
Yes.
huge CVB there, Visit St. Pete, Clearwater. And I think they were all funded by bed taxes. I don't think they took any sort of that. But again, that's a tourism driven market. It's a little bit different. So, are you saying, I wonder if they had a cut from hotels too?
Yes, many times, and I'm thinking more of the CVB, where when they get a lead, a curated, a curated lead.
Like an RFP or request for
Right.
proposal, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, spot on.
Okay, this is so interesting. Wow.
So here's, and sorry, I
No,
don't
it's
mean to,
okay.
but the OTAs, and so it kind of goes back to this whole idea of revenue strategy and revenue optimization. OTAs kind of get themselves a bad rap, deservedly so, right? We just had a whole conversation about it. But there's two things that I see going on is our understanding of the cost per acquisition by segment. So if we laid out all of the different segments that we have coming into our hotel, very few times do teams have the transparency of which segments cost them the most and which ones they can be optimized. So, like I said, OTAs can get a bad rap for all of the reasons we talked about, but many times it's their group business that's the most expensive. And so that's point number one. The other point is the power of an OTA. When I was VP of Sales and Marketing at Hyatt, there was many owners that would grouse about OTAs and be like, okay, we need, and hey, listen, my response was like, you know what, I can take you off an OTA tomorrow if you want, but understand you're not going to be on the shelf for travelers from Thailand, or the sheer power of that distribution system. Hey, I understand, I can take you off the shelf. So there's kind of that push pull of
That's
how.
something, I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's something we absolutely talked about in the first module, which is what is on the shelf, right? And so what we mean by on the shelf means we have our rooms out there for people to see and take, right? So people in much different experiences. We've got the mom in Rhode Island looking to go down to Hilton Head with their family. She might see a hotel room because of a certain way she's looking for a room. And then someone over in Thailand or wherever, like you just said, we want that hotel room to pop up in front of them. And that the way that it gets there is the OTAs, right?
That's
Because
right.
my hotel brand isn't going to be able to populate itself every single place and every single shelf, as we say, out there so that guests can know we're in existence, right? So when we remove ourselves from an international, something like an OTA that's going to put us around the world, we are potentially causing major limitations to bookings, right? And so that's where the value comes for hotels to have not only OTAs, but the right OTAs per their market. For example, I worked in JW Marriott Ritz-Carlton Orlando Grand Lakes, and in that market was a lot of high-end business travelers, right? We did have leisure, and especially during the holidays and 4th of July and stuff, but a lot of it was meetings. We had a lot of convention space, right? And so that would use different OTAs or different distribution channels than maybe a Hampton Inn in downtown Fort Wayne that is family and leisure or transient focus, is all the different terms we use for the same thing, right?
Yep.
Is that true?
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And the brilliance of revenue management is figuring out, and you hear this in revenue management all the time, but figuring out right customer, right time, right price. And if there's all of this traffic going by us, how many here, sorry for my stammering, but this is the best way I can explain it. I want folks to imagine your hotel as a bathtub, right? And there's all of these different faucets that turn on at different times, at different prices, with a different velocity. And so we can turn one of those on and fill up that tub, but it's at that very low rated business that isn't going to get us to our financial goal or our financial vision. And so it's really this orchestration of when do I turn on what faucets at what time, not only to fill up the tub, because that's easy, that's occupancy. How do I fill it up at the right time to get to that financial vision that we've laid out?
So to maximize the revenue, right?
Absolutely.
And so this is such an interesting topic because students may think, or guests may think, well, they just want to be at 100% occupancy. But that's only part of the story, because we want to maximize the revenue during the right time of year, all these little things that go into place, rather than just filling the beds, because filling the beds and not selling at the right room rate is not going to help us as an operation. We can actually lose money like that because of the cost it takes to turn over rooms and all those sorts of things.
Yep.
So it's interesting.
And let me add to that, because
Yeah.
I like it's really great. Now put the customer in it. Like, hey, listen, I could open that one faucet that gets us to 100% occupancy, yet it's a low rated customer. And they came in through a channel that is loyal to a channel. They're not loyal to us. Like I would say, I'm like, you're kind of yesterday's date, there's not a loyalty to it. So let's say I fill it up, and the cost of acquisition, the churn that you're talking about, and I'm the second date. I'm not the real girlfriend. And so when we look at that, we have to, not only from a P&L side of our standpoint, we have to look at that customer experience and the value of a long-term customer and say, hey, listen, you know what? This may not be the most profitable, or excuse me, this may be more profitable. It's harder to do, but the long-term effects of it, as well as not only the room rate, but they spend a lot in the restaurant, or they do all of these ancillary things. So the profitability of the customer shifts.
There's something interesting that I want to touch on that I never made this connection before you had just said that. So back to the Priceline story and my booking in Vegas. So just to put it in perspective, this is a long while ago. This was like 2002. But let me share something. So we booked it through Priceline, which we now know is an opaque channel, where I didn't know where I was booking, right?
Yep.
It ended up being the Venetian property. And at the time, I want to say, again, this was 2002 time period. So it was about $128 a night. I was a college student, didn't have a lot of money, took my sister out there. We wanted to go for the first time in years and do something together. Well, here's what happened, that they created a loyalty with us. So we got to the front desk, they asked us, so I'm like 21-ish, somewhere around that. So I'm young, right? Mm-hmm. They asked us, have you ever been to Vegas before? And we said, no. And they're like, we're going to upgrade you to a suite. They put us in this like totally gangster room, for lack of a better adjective. We felt like millionaires. And like, I'm telling you, if I go back, I will absolutely stay at the Venetian because of that experience. And I would book direct through them now that I'm an adult and that sort of thing. But it's just interesting to look at in that perspective of how a hotel could turn around and capture through an opaque channel, even though that's not common. And some of the hotels are going to be limited and not be able to do things that like Vegas can pull off because of all the special rooms they have. But I just thought of that.
That's a great story. And I applaud that, because a lot of times what we see is the opposite. We see, they booked in through the opaque channel. So give them the room, give them our, that room in the back that's missing a lampshade, that kind of I love that, because rarely do we hear it where they said, hey, listen, we didn't own the booking. We don't own the distribution, but we're going to own that experience. And we're going to keep connected to them. The other part of it, so that I applaud them. The other part of it is, hey, listen, what we know for sure is third party and OTAs are going to become extremely pervasive and keep going in that point of sale. So now how do we start reorientating our teams to start showing up at that point of inspiration. And here's my concern is when I look at sales teams and when I look at marketing teams, and I know that we're here to look, we're talking about distribution and revenue management, but one begets the other because we're looking at a commercial strategy. I need my sales and marketing teams not to be showing up at the point of sale, because from revenue management to the OT, I can handle that. Where I need them to start engaging with the customer is earlier, because the last thing I meet with so many owners, investors of hotels where they're like, why do I need a sales team? And I'm like, as long as the market is big and demand is great, you may not, because your team is showing up at the point of sale and they're competing with OTAs. Now, if your marketing and sales teams are showing up earlier in the buying cycle or earlier in the customer journey, you can own their mindset. Now, similar to how what you were explaining at the Venetian, like they own you now, like
Oh, totally. I wouldn't stay anywhere else, not even to see what it was like, because we had the best time and it was a beautiful property and we saw all these restaurants and we spent all this money in their gift shops. Even being young, like that was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. And just so, and even on the lowest point, you were just acknowledged as something special versus, give them the smoking room that still smells musty.
Exactly. And that could have been I didn't realize it until we were just talking. Something you said made me think of that. And I'm like, what an awesome thing that was for them to turn an opaque customer into a customer for life, essentially.
That's right.
And an interesting concept, because my next question was going to ask you about how distribution can affect the guest or the guest experience. But I guess we've just kind of addressed that, because even though OTAs may own a good portion of business, even though that happens, you still do have a chance to create a personalized guest experience with them. You still have a chance to go above and beyond and earn their business for life, but it takes a lot of focus and it takes a lot of care. But in the past, maybe we were just checking in guests. We didn't pay attention to any of that stuff. Now I think we need to a little bit more.
Couldn't agree with you more. Here's to highlight and give you some information around just what you said. We did a study about customer centricity and customer focus. Not really customer service, but just customer centricity. And so we looked at all of the different departments in the hotel. And this might be a little bit hard to hear for those that love sales, marketing, and revenue management. The teams that showed up the least centric was sales, marketing, and revenue management. The least, because from a front desk, they were always, what do you need? What can I help you with? Let me help you. Maintenance.
Even PBX.
What can I
help you with?
How can I help you? Where do you need to go? Maintenance, housekeeping. They were all about customer service or customer centricity. When we got to sales, marketing, and revenue management, they were completely about the product. And so let me tell you about our hotel. Let me tell you about our stuff. Let me show you our rooms. And in fact, it was interesting. Had kind of a spirited debate with a salesperson. They said, no, we ask all these questions about their meeting. And I said, wait a second. What do you ask about their meeting? And they asked questions based upon their specs, which is not about them. It's about how do you fit into my world? So I always think about how we have to show up more customer centric and think about what it is, not what they need, because that's become almost like this bastardized word that means really requirements, but really what are they searching for, or what do they care about? Yes. And so many times we miss the mark. And so I like to impress upon our commercial teams is if you're talking about you're a really bad date. Like if I was to go out, and have dinner with you and you sat there talking about you the whole time, I'd be like, you know what? I gotta cough. I gotta go. Yet we do it all the time within sales, marketing, and revenue management, where we show up talking about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. rather than starting with the listening hat on and saying, what can I find out and learn about them, and then connect it to what we can offer and make it a personalized experience for them. It's so interesting. So the last question I want to harass you about today, Kate, is how different can distribution management look? And I want to ask you, like, for big hotel chains, how are they doing this? For a brand, say Holiday Inn, how are they doing this? And then for an independent, how do they manage this? Because we know we've learned so far in the class that there is something called a channel manager, right? And that can address, and that can hold all those bathtub faucets you were talking about and harness them for you, right? Because otherwise you're going to go batty and go crazy trying to do all this stuff on your own. But there goes another cost. The channel manager is a cost, right? So how do we do this if we're a large conglomerate, if we are a brand like Holiday Inn, or if we're an independent? Talk us through that.
Yeah. So here's the hard part about distribution management, is the systems themselves are antiquated, and it's so huge.
In the hotel systems.
In the hotel system. And I'll even broaden it out, even travel industries, because really the GDS was born out of the airline industries, and
global distribution.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yep, global distribution. So, it started with Amadeus with American Airlines and Galileo for the international. And so they were the beginning. So we're dealing with systems that were built, in the 60s and 70s. And so it is becoming so complex and new systems. So that's still there. That infrastructure, it's still there. And it's kind of the spine of everything. Now, new systems are coming in really, SAS has a great program. Duetto has a great program, but it's all kind of snapped on top of this spine. And because what you just said, from a brand to an independent to international, they all have to snap into this system to make it work. And so it becomes really this very complex web. So that being said, is no going in that it is going to be complex, one, and two, Frankenstein together, whether you're a Marriott or whether you're a Hyatt or whether you're, Kate & Co. Seaside Boutique. So what you have to understand is not so much like the detail, but understand just the ecosystem and how much of that is kind of Frankenstein together and how you can take away some of that complexity. No going in, it's going to be complex. No going in that you're going to have a channel manager if you don't have a brand doing it for you. And there's a cost to that. However, how do you lessen the pain and being able to have those conversations of saying, where is my pain going to be? Where am I going to lose? What are some of the complexities around it? And I even have, and we're even talking about the front end. There's a whole nother back end that manages the transaction, whether you're dealing with Citibank or PayPal or now Venmo or all of the, when you're looking at the full journey.
You're speaking about when you get paid from the OTA into the hotel, right?
That's right. Yes.
And is that about once a month usually that an OTA is going to pay you, or does it work like credit card transactions? Do you know about that?
Yeah, it works more like credit card transactions, and they get, depending on the agreements, they could get billed and the velocity and volume, where as well as the agreements themselves.
So could that cause cash flow issues for a hotel, for a small hotel? Like, so the customers are already there, they're staying, but they're not going to get paid for it for a few weeks later, right? That's what we're saying?
Yeah, could be.
Okay.
Well, more from an accrual standpoint, because the reservation cost will come in later. And so they'll get paid for it. They'll get paid the take rate right? They'll get paid that take rate, but then there's going to be a cost that comes in later, that if you're not kind of tracking it right, you could have a surprise.
Wow, that's so interesting. It really is complex. So do hotels have a lot of, I don't know how to say it, except for arm strength and dealing with like an OTA that says maybe the OTA isn't doing things right for them, isn't providing right service, or is selling rooms at what should have been package rate at individual net rates and stuff and messing up the hotel revenue. Can they get out of those contracts if they're having a bad relationship?
Yeah, they can.
Okay.
The hard part is, do they want to, like, or they may want to, but can they? It's
Can
like,
they afford to, right?
can they afford to? And so I think that's kind of a lot of where the angst comes from is I feel like I'm being abused, but it's kind of the cost of business. And so they feel more out of control. And a lot of times that's our work. We advise them on how do you have, and even the same thing, not only with the OTAs, but hey, listen, the brands, hey, listen, I paid my franchise fee, I paid royalty fees, and now I'm having to pay this, and this. And having those hard discussions with a brand can be even more gut wrenching.
I want to stop you for a second. So real quick, are you saying that, so if I'm a franchise property, I pay the fees and everything that we all know about, the franchising fees and marketing fees and stuff, but do they have set distribution channels so that the hotelier has to pay, the independent hotelier has to pay the brand for the channel access and they have to participate? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, some of them you have to participate. Some of them it's your choice. So a great example of that is call gating. And so what call gating is there's calls that will come in directly to the hotel, but let's say you're a smaller Hilton Garden Inn or Hampton Inn or Courtyard. Rather, your front desk would normally be taking that, but he or she has a whole flood of check-ins and whatever. What call gating says is we can switch that to a call center, and they can take the calls. Well, there's a charge for that, right? And so that's one of those things that it's the power, or they have the choice to incur those costs or not. The same thing is, your 1-800 reservation. There's a cost for that. There's also the cost of national sales, where if they send you a direct lead and you get the business, there's a cost for that. So all of a sudden it starts adding up. And of course, this is all disclosed in what they call the FDD, which is the Franchise Disclosure Agreement, where it outlines all of it. And the hard part of it is you're looking through it, and it's 5 cents per this, but then all of a sudden you realize what that costs.
Yeah, it adds up, right? I mean, the average profit on a limited service property, meaning no bellman, maybe a small restaurant or just grab and go area, you don't have a huge profit margin, right? Until you even go up to the ultra luxury, right? I mean, so a lot of hotels are operating on fairly slim margins. So all these things nickel and diming out of that really does add up.
That's right.
Well, Kate, I want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been such a pleasure talking with you. And I hope we can reach back out to you and do another interview on some topics later in the course.
Please do. And I have just a love for this, because I think what's kind of neat, like different from other parts of the hotel, is this whole distribution revenue management side gets us to use both sides of our brain. Like you said, there's an economic impact, there's a financial thing, and then there's this customer centricity point where it's really this alchemy of all of these different things. So I'm all about bringing sexy back to revenue optimization.
I love your examples are hilarious, but it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Cheers to you and your team and
right,
your
thank you.
Students.
Thank you.